Thanks, Robert. Good afternoon, everybody. And before I introduce our next session, just to let you all know, there is an animal health workshop taking place at 1:30 in our breakout sessions with Elanco, where Matt Coulson will be discussing the topic of transition cow management. But continuing now on the main stage, we have another brilliant panel and what will undoubtedly be a very exciting debate. I'm delighted to hand over to Stuart Martin, Manager of the Scottish Dairy Hub.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Claire, and well done so far in such a fantastic event. And welcome, everybody. My name is Stuart Martin from the Scottish Dairy Hub, and thank you for logging in today, which is very much a different AgriScot, but your attendance is very, very much appreciated as ever. Today will be a great opportunity to hear from a fantastic panel that we always seem to get lined up, and all three people in the panel cover several disciplines within the dairy industry, and so their views will be very useful to all. The Scottish Dairy Hub has been running for over 6 years, and already this year we've had hundreds of inquiries, and it's quite interesting that a lot of the inquiries we get are around common topics, and I think these topics will be discussed today in greater detail, and I will look forward to that. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome my co-host today, Becki Leach, who's Senior Consultant at Kite Consultant, and she'll be co-hosting this debate with me to help me to navigate the maze that is the online world. I'd like to take this opportunity, though, to thank you for all the questions we've received in advance. That's been very helpful. And what we'll do is we'll help steer the conversation we're going to have today. There's also an opportunity for you to put questions in. You can hopefully all see the chat section. And just to be clear, to put your question into the stage section of the chat section, which is the right of your screen, and that will help us. What I would say at this point is technology, as I say, is tricky for us all. I've got laptop screens open here, mobile phones. We're looking at chats here and chats there. So please be patient. The whole idea is to hear your views, and we will hopefully field as many questions as we get. If there are questions that we do miss, please pop them in again, and we'll try and get them there. The whole point is to hear what you have to say. I think one of the other things that Claire has mentioned, just again, please be aware that the question that you'll put in is visible, your name attached to the question, so please be mindful for yourself, other people attending, and for the panel as well. Coming on to the panel, as I say, it's a great panel of experience, and the first one up is Chris Walkland, who will be familiar to you all. Chris is an agriculture journalist, market analyst, and consultant specialising in the dairy sector. He has written for the main UK monthly magazines for over 25 years on all aspects of the dairy supply chain, from primary producer through to the economics and politics at processor, retailer, and consumer level. Secondly, we have Nicholas Saphir, who is the current chair at AHDB, has a wide background in agriculture and horticulture, having built a public company farming, processing, and trading fruit and vegetables in the UK, Europe, South Africa, and South America. His dairy experience includes spending the last 18 years building the Organic Milk Producers Cooperative into becoming the world's second largest dedicated organic milk cooperative. He also has a long and successful record of chairing industry and government bodies in the food and farming sector. And thirdly in the panel, again, a familiar face, hopefully to a number of you. Raised within a proud family, Robert Graham has farmed with the Graham's Dairies for 5 generations. Robert brings an innate understanding of the dairy, farming and business development to his role as managing director of the Bridge of Allen-based company. Robert joined the family farming and dairy business in 1991, and today the dairy produces an award-winning homegrown range of the highest quality food and drink, which is made using the finest Scottish ingredients from 100 specially selected farming partners who follow Graham's key values of family farming, heritage, provenance and quality. From their family farm in the heart of Scotland, Graham's has grown through 3 generations and is now proudly Scotland's #1 chosen food brand.
Great, Stuart. Thanks for doing those introductions. Just a really quick intro from me. I'm Becki Leach, Senior Consultant at Kite Consulting. Many of you, no doubt, listening in today know some of my colleagues who operate across Scotland. So Dave Keeley, Rob Hughes, Joss Forfeit. As a business, Kite Consulting provide technical business and people consultancy to farmers, and we also work across the supply chain with processors, retailers and allied industry. And I'm really delighted to be sat here today linking up with the Scottish Dairy Hub to bring this question time seminar to you, and also to be hosting such a great panel of speakers. So I suppose without further ado, let's get into the meat of the session. And Rob, I'll come to you first. So Stuart mentioned, recently named Scotland's #1 chosen fruit brand. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to the Graham's business?
Well, so it's a long way from when I joined in '91, and we were only delivering milk in Stirling and Alloa, the local area, to the farm that my grandfather came to. It's a great achievement. We don't really sit still, though. It's really about continuing to produce great quality products and trying to innovate by launching more of those.
And what do you think it means for you in the future?
It's good, certainly, for our conversations with retailers. We were #1 food brand and most chosen brand in Scotland. I think #9 from a total context, up against Coca-Cola, so a top 10 brand. So it certainly gives us the ability to have conversations, to have product on shelf, and ultimately products need to be on shelf in order for them to sell. So it's positive for moving forward.
Yeah, I think we might end up picking up some of those elements as we continue on. Nick, just you've been in the role at AHDB now sort of 8 months, and a particularly difficult 8 months as well. I suppose there's 2 questions here. What has been your biggest challenge to date, first of all? And I suspect we all might have an idea of the answer.
Well, I don't think you do, because I think the biggest challenge to date is I've only seen all my colleagues from the head down to the waist. I haven't met anybody, actually. No, I think the biggest challenge is obvious. It's a time of phenomenal change. It's a time when actually many people don't recognise the change that's coming. AHDB has got to change. It will change. We will be publishing on the 4th of December our programme for change, which is significant and fundamental. But the real issue is whether British agriculture in total, and Scotland as part of that, can adapt to not only the trade agreements that are coming at us, not only what happens in Brexit, but what happens in opening new markets, and what happens in terms of environment and climate change. So enormous amounts of change to come. It's a time when I think the whole industry has got to recognise that partnering and open working together is critical. And when farmers have got to actually recognise the availability of support that's there for them. So lots and lots of challenges, you're right. Absolutely right, Becki, lots of challenges.
Interestingly, a few of the things that you've mentioned, Brexit, trade, environment, those we've had some of those questions through already, so we'll pick up a few of those as we go through today's session. Chris, just moving over to you, I think the question that our audience would like you to probably answer this afternoon is, what does Scottish dairy look like? What does the future hold? I think you've prepared a couple of slides that you'd like to share as well.
A few slides, yeah. Are they going to come on now? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to kick off the debate by posing the provocative question as to whether Scottish dairy is living a lie and pretending it's something it isn't. And I'm actually looking forward to being put back in my box and sent back to Englandshire by those in charge and reassured there is a pathway to progress and better things ahead, because I think that's what everybody in your industry deserves. But before that, a quick look at where things are. I don't know what that was. Scottish milk prices are on average pretty similar to the UK as a whole since the last AgriScot. And I hope you can see that graph there. But there's a huge differential between the aligned and the non-aligned. The aligned, the green line, the Scottish price is the red price. And basically since 2018, for every 1 million litres of milk produced by a farmer in Scotland, the aligned have bagged 80 grand more. We can see on this slide a huge story that relates to what's happening everywhere in the country. Basically, it's the top 10 non-aligned milk prices ranked from highest on the left to lowest on the right, and labelled by market. And what we can see is that out of the top 10, 8 of them are in cheese. The one on the far left is the Arla price. They have a cheese interest too. And the premium liquid, which is second, is Crediton dairy flavoured milk. So 8 out of 10 of the top prices are in cheese. Here's another way of looking at it. And this graph shows that from 2019, consistently, 6 to 8 cheese contracts are always in the top 10 payers. The other way of looking at it is the liquid dairies are at the bottom of the league. And this begs a question as to why and where is Scotland's growth plan for cheese? Because I don't think that's going to change. So where are we now in the market? Well, cheese is strong and it's actually strengthening. Liquid is weak, but it's strengthening because a lot of capacities come out of the industry, and both of those are positives. Cream price at the moment is pretty awful, and I have to say it doesn't support current liquid milk prices. It's in the 135s to 140s. It really needs to be the high 155s to have a bit of optimism. Commodities, they're weakening slightly due to COVID, but I think on balance, they're probably better than they could be. And then we have huge Brexit uncertainty. Forecast prices, I wish these could look better, but they don't, and everything's pointing to 26 to 27p as a base price. Cheesemakers will pay a bit more. Liquid, I think, will struggle. Arla will pay a fair bit more, not least because it's brands, including Lurpak, which we've heard a lot about. And there's George Eustace on the Andrew Marr show. We all know about that. And there's the reaction from industry to George Eustace on the Andrew Marr show. Shock and horror. So, is Scottish dairy living a lie? Why do I pose this question? Well, you've got Scotland's biggest brand dairy company wanting to invest and can't invest. Robert is the only processor I know across the UK who wants to build a greenfield site but can't. We've got Lactalis at Stranraer that could do what Saputo is doing at Davidstow, but isn't at the moment. Why not? Is anybody in Scotland incentivising it to do it? We've got politicians playing lip service, I think, because Scotland can do for dairy what Ireland has done. Are they? No. Well, I don't see it happening. We've got processing capacity closing, not opening. We know the reasons why, and they're pretty good reasons. But what's the long-term plan to open some more? Is there one? Does there need to be one? We've got Scotland's dairy farmers. They're absolutely brilliant at what they do. Give them an inch on volume, they'll take a mile. Too much so, probably. And yet, those that want new milk buyers can't find new milk buyers, apart from one 200 miles away in England. And that's crazy. We've got discretionary pricing. Everybody says, let's work together. We need to work together. Well, the aligned pools do nothing for that, in my opinion. There's nothing like a bit of equality to get people working together. And at the moment, there isn't. It's a bit like asking Danny Dyer to work with Jacob Rees-Mogg. It isn't going to happen. And then we've got the infrastructure in place. We've got a decent dairy hub. We've got Scottish Food and Drink. We've got the Dairy Growth Board. Everything is in place. You know, there's a target for 100 million in new sales by 2021, but I haven't seen a great deal of new millions by the target is 100 million by 2030, but I haven't seen much by 2021. Maybe I've missed it. So I think there's massive opportunities for dairy, and dairy in Scotland, it's huge. So the industry has to stop living the lie, or put up or shut up. And that's my presentation finished.
Wow, Chris, nice and neutral as always there.
Always balance.
Stuart, shall we kick over to you to get the questions going?
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And interestingly, we've had a lot of questions coming in, obviously, about Brexit, and I see one coming in the panel there. It's 6 weeks away now. It's been looming. It's looming. And I suppose our first question, and I think it'll be really appropriate for Robert, is very simple. The uncertainty of Brexit is looming. How is your dairy positioned, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of work going in for the changeover. We're primarily a domestic business. We've got a bit of export to the Republic, which may potentially face some challenge, but primarily we're domestic. And interesting, looking at Chris talking about Lurpak, and there's obviously a lot on social media around that. But to be clear, Lurpak is £400 million a year at retail sales in the UK. It's maybe more. Now, they've said that if there are tariffs, that they will, we cannot make it in Britain. But if people don't buy that product, we're going to have to buy something else. So I can only look at it from our business, and it'll affect different businesses in different ways. And first of all, we base our business on making great products, being innovative, provenance, authenticity. But make no mistake, there is a lot of added value products coming into the UK from outside of the UK, but will be subject to high tariffs potentially if there is no deal. And there has been a slowness amongst retailers to de-risk that. It is a significant risk. So there are some categories that come in, dairy categories that come in from Europe, where that entirely comes in from Denmark or Germany, and people either need to live with higher prices at retail, the tariffs, or there needs to be investment go in, and I think particularly with some of these investment will go in because the tariffs will prevent it. And obviously for export businesses on cheddar and so on, I guess it will be a problem. That's not our business. Ours is fresh liquid, and we primarily compete against imported fresh added value products, whether that is skiers or butters, yogurts from France or Germany or Denmark. That's primarily as a business what we compete against.
I see you nodding there, Chris. What's your thoughts on this?
I was nodding in relation to the cheddar, because cheddar exports is what we need to continue to happen. I accept everything that Robert says because of his domestic orientated business. But in terms of the cheesemakers, and remember those 8 out of 10 of the top payers of cheesemakers, exports drive the cheese price because British retailers don't want to pay the price. So as far as I'm concerned, if foreign markets are prepared to pay a premium price for a premium product, let's ship our product abroad and let the Irish or whoever fill the gap, supply to the retailers in the UK, because some of those want open book accounting. And open book accounting means no or very, very low margins. And if tariffs come along and screw the cheesemakers' exports up, then I really worry about that sector.
That's interesting.
And Nicholas, sorry, Becki.
Right. Okay.
I think we were both going to ask you the same question. I mentioned, value add and how that might look. I suppose a question maybe for AHDB and the work that they do, and I know they've got an export team that have worked hard on developing export markets. What position is AHDB, or what role is AHDB going to play in this post-Brexit environment?
Okay, can I just, forgive me, Becki, I will answer that, but let me just go back for a minute to Chris and Robert. First of all, Chris is spot on, as always. It's really interesting that the UK dairy returns, I'm not talking about Scotland, UK dairy returns have lagged behind the best of European returns consistently for the last 10 years. And that's because we're still hooked on this view that liquid milk is the top paying market to be in. And of course it's not, and it hasn't been for some time now. And if you look at the cheese returns, much of the cheese profitability has come out of exports. It's not been out of supplying the home market. So we've got to, in Chris's terms, we've got to look at the lie, or in my terms, we've got to hold a mirror up to the industry. And it's very interesting that Robert's business has been good on new product development. British dairying has been very poor on new product development generally. We do import much of our dairy added value. And even if we have a deal with Europe now, you have to recognize that a free trade agreement is one thing, but the complications of bringing product into the country will become quite considerable. I'm not talking about January, February, which could be horrendous, but if you look further, we will have issues such as customs clearance. We will have issues such as getting hauliers to come to the UK with the delays that will come. Remember that already they're saying that the only priority will be on haulage will be day-old chicks and seafood. So fresh foods will go into the queue with everybody else. And I can see that the cost of actually importing into the UK and exporting, the cost of importing will be quite significant, whatever the tariffs are. So there will be a bigger opportunity. The other point I'd make is that if we look at where we are in trade terms, sure, our biggest selling brands of butter in the UK are not British. That's crazy. But I'll give you another one. The second largest brand for butter in the States is Irish. Kerrygold is the second biggest brand in the United States for butter, 34,000 tons a year. And the American market has an insatiable appetite for butterfat. So you start looking at the world as a global opportunity, and you look at new product development as an opportunity, and I think we've got a long way to go. And coming back to something else Chris said, which is about capacity in Scotland, we would be very, very wrong to start looking at the problem of moving 20% of milk from Scotland down into England, which we do at the moment, and saying, let's have capacity to manufacture commodity. Let's actually put in a powder plant or something like that. Going toe to toe in world markets on dairy commodity is a fool's game, but there's phenomenal opportunity around added value. So let's come back to your question about AHDB. Very interestingly, I was looking at the reply to requests for views from Scotland on dairying, and one of the things that was said was, don't spend any of your money in the dairy sector on building exports. We're not interested. Now the answer is that actually, if I look, for example, taking Chris's point of cheese, between France, Germany and Holland, on average between them, there is something like $4 billion of exports a year on cheese alone. So it's 3.4 for Holland, it's 4.2 I think for France, and it's 4.5 for Germany. We're less than $1 billion. We are less than a third of the smallest of those exporters. And the markets, yes, it's in Europe, and a lot of our small cheese makers make their money in Europe, but it's all over the world. The market in America is very significant and is full of opportunity. The market in the Middle East, it's not just about cheddar, it's about mozzarella, it's about all sorts of things. So AHDB, in terms of market, I think that we have a whole lot of responsibilities, if you like. If I start with the home market, one of the big questions is, how do you actually make sure that the home market is better integrated and we have balance between supply and demand? How do we have greater transparency? We found in COVID-19 when we did that, suddenly, when the whole industry came together, we no longer had the problem that everybody was talking about. And our returns as an industry during COVID-19 compared with France, Germany, Holland and America was stunningly good. So I think the first thing is we've got to help landscape and map the industry and bring it together on a whole range of issues. We've got to look at added value, we've got to encourage it. We've also got to promote exports, significantly promote exports, not just on cheese, but on butter, butter opportunity, butter fats, etc. A lot to do around marketing. I could go on, but I won't.
I'm sure. Yeah, thank you. I think interesting, we've got a lot of topics to get through, and again, at the forefront of this. We're sort of looking at the zeitgeist just now, and I think that really one of the things that we've all been occupied with in the dairy industry recently has been milk contracts. And we've had a couple of questions there in the panel. We've had a couple of questions in advance. Really, to you, Chris, milk contracts. You're at the coalface writing about this every day. Nobody likes unintended consequences. Do you have any worries about what could come out of this consultation?
Yeah, I do, and they were increased actually on Sunday because I've heard George Eustace speak at the CMEX conference a few times, and I did question his knowledge on dairying at that conference. And on Sunday, I think I was even more concerned about how little he knows about the industry. And he's in charge with setting the ground rules for contracts. I think my main worry is that farmers could end up worse off. Right? They could get a stable milk price, a more stable milk price, but they could get a lower one. Alternatively, they could get a higher milk price, but for fixed volumes. So overall, their income might be lower. Now, what the industry needs is more income at the top end, so more can come out of the bottom end for farmers. Robert needs more money in from the retailers, so he can pay more money out to the farmers. So we've got to get that solution out of the milk contracts, and we've got to keep working until we do. And I question DEFRA's knowledge, I question their skill, but I hope that collectively the industry can come up with the right solution within DEFRA's constraints.
Thanks, Chris. I suppose, Robert, maybe a question to you on milk contracts as somebody who's buying 15% of Scotland's milk. What's your views on the contract consultation? What do you think it means for you and your business?
Yeah, I think what Chris has said, and Ian Potter's said similar things around the concerns that actually may give potentially poorer return and less certainty. I think when government get involved in things, it's not always good, especially if we're concerned about our.
It's never good, Robert.
Yeah, we're concerned about our understanding. So that is my concern, and we're talking about it starts to feel like regulation, and we start talking. I can just remember the end of the milk marketing boards, and as a wee boy competing against these businesses with people getting paid a lot of money and maybe not doing a very good job. That'll be my view, of course, but some of what we are talking about earlier, and the amount of products coming in and the lack of innovation within our industry is, I think, has its seeds in the boards of old when they were building processing capacity to deal with milk volume rather than trying to make products that consumers were looking for, which is partly why we abdicated our butter market to foreign brands back in whatever it was, 40s, 50s, 60s. I don't know, but we abdicated some of these markets, and we're still paying the price for it now.
Nick, can I ask for your thoughts? What do you think about the milk contracts? Can legislation in those established supply chains create a win-win situation for both? And and I suppose that follows up with the question that's come through on the chat about how do we fare if we don't have contracts in place and we don't have legislation in place? How do we guarantee that share gets distributed throughout the whole supply chain for those that are in poorer contracts?
Well, I'm not going to go into the politics of the contracts because this is an area where I think that others will have their positions and they'll argue them. I would just make two general points. One is there is a constant theme that we have to find ways of creating more fairness in the supply chain. And redistribution of margin and comments like that. Can I make a general comment? That might have been true in the early 2000s. There isn't very much margin in the whole supply chain. now. So talking about redistribution is a real issue when you consider that retail margins have dropped from on average 11-12% down to 3-4%, and some of them making losses. When you look at the manufacturers not making a phenomenal amount of money, I won't comment on Robert, but overall the problem is that we are still focused on liquid milk, and we're still focused on a highly uneconomic competitive marketplace. The only way we can deal with that is not about contracts. It's about two things. One is it's about recognizing that actually we have a cheap food policy. We have a social policy about people who can't afford to buy food. That's real. But we have a cheap food policy that actually means that we actually are selling product on the counter too cheaply. There's only two ways to deal with that. One is to actually look at the global marketplace and say, are there higher prices elsewhere? And that's where exports do matter. I think exports matter for the dairy industry much more than balance of payments is in terms of keeping the home market honest. And if you can actually say that I can export 60 million litres or 100 million litres and therefore my customer can't have it at the price he wants, that's much more powerful than having a contract situation. The other thing is that we're going to have winners and losers, aligned and non-aligned contracts. Chris is absolutely right when you look at the differences. So I think that actually this is a false argument, a false discussion. The contract discussion is not the key. The key is a much more aligned supply chain. It's a recognition of better use of milk and better realizing of milk opportunity, both in the home market and exports.
Chris, I'm really quick.
There's a perfect adage for this. There's a perfect adage for the milk contract, and it's this: there is no situation or problem that a politician cannot make worse than by trying to help.
So I think we can safely say that you maybe believe that the contract consultation won't necessarily return at farm gate level, Chris. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, but I think we've got to have it, and we've got to try. And you know, the unions have to try and forge a better way forward. So we need to have the debate. So I think together as an industry, we need to have it. It's there for the making. Let's get on with it and see what comes out of it.
Thank you, Chris. A couple of big things I want to maybe move on to is I want to cover today definitely because we've had the questions in is COVID and supply chain. But I'll deal with COVID first. And we're all bored to tears about COVID, serious issue, and it's still amongst us. But a very quick question to Chris, and it comes in again, we've had a question on the panel there about the relationship between milk buyer and farmer, about trust. Interestingly, did the COVID crisis bring milk buyers and producers closer together, do you think?
I think it generally did, apart from the rogues, in which case it divided them even further. And COVID has really identified who the rogues actually are. And there are precious few of them, I have to say. There are those who had to take the decisions that they took in order to stay in business and to ensure that the farmers had a processor at the end of the day. If they hadn't taken the decisions they did, they would have gone bust. But there was precious few rogues, and we know who they are now. But generally, I would say it brings the industry together, and I think we'll be stronger for it.
And Robert, with COVID, from a number of businesses across a number of sectors, the thing I think I observed was it was the adaptability and the quickness of how you can react that would help a business. That must have been a massive challenge for Graham's Dairies.
Yeah, it was a big challenge, but the point around us working with our farmers closely was well made, because we were doing a lot of calls with type of calls with all our farmers on a very regular basis, particularly as we were working through April, when we had all this milk coming in and we were unsure about what the volume demand was going to be. And it also made the whole chain work. Our contact with buyers was a lot more frequent, pretty much daily. So it worked all the way through. It just showed how important milk is to have on the shelf for for our customers, but obviously for our consumers to be able to go in and get what they wanted, particularly at a time when there was a lot of concern, was an important role that we played. But there is that, and it also showed just the strains in the supply chain, not just in food, not just in dairy, but right across the supermarket supply chain. It really properly got tested, and to some extent, a couple of supermarkets probably fell down from a supply chain perspective, would be our view. Certainly dairy did. Dairy as an industry did well. I think it brought home the importance of dairy to customers, but it was also interesting to see consumers picking up dairy products rather than almond milk on shelves, because people are buying red meat rather than whatever. Because people were instinctively going back to products that they inherently trust, and I think we can, and that was good to see, because we can sometimes get ourselves worked up a bit when it feels like our industries are under attack.
Stuart, can I come in on that one for a minute? Or sorry, or Becki, whoever I'm meant to be addressing. I think that I'd make two other points. I think behind the scenes, I know, because AHDB were right in the middle of it, there was an amazing degree of sharing of information that has never been done before. The Competition Authority was asked to release the regulations on certain sharing, and AHDB was asked by government and by the industry to work with Dairy UK, and we very quickly put together a complete picture on the supply that was coming forward, the capacity around the country, and what we could do about it. And that was the first time I've ever seen the industry work together on a capacity sharing scheme that actually made a big difference. The other point was that we put together very quickly a £1 million promotion, Milk the Moment, which was supported not just by AHDB, not just by the industry, but by Scotland, the government, by the Welsh government, by DEFRA, and we actually put on a campaign within a matter of 2 weeks, given the loss of hospitality as it was, which has shifted, for whatever reason, has shifted demand quite considerably by something like 10% towards liquid milk and the consumption of liquid milk, which is where the capacity was. So I think it was a moment, taking everybody's view, that was a moment when the industry did come together quite aggressively and quite actively and positively.
I think, Nick, as well, it probably changed AHDB's delivery to levy payers, and to pick up on one of the questions earlier from Colin about, how AHDB delivers to its levy payers. A huge amount of or a proportion of what AHDB does is about knowledge exchange events, and obviously, in the midst of COVID, you rightly say that switched over to the focus of AHDB switched over to the marketing campaign and that more collaborative role. But, what do you foresee any learnings that have come out of the back of COVID that will be going forward?
Oh, fantastic learnings. Amazing, right across the board. I think that, just to give you a separate thing. First of all, sharing information and getting the supply chain, working with the supply chain rather than thinking that farming is independent of the supply chain. That's an enormous lesson. The second thing I'd say is just take on-farm knowledge exchange, and I'm not talking just about dairy. Our webinars on farm improvement and are working with consultants, Kite and others, on these webinars. We're getting 1,000 people a time looking at these webinars, either in real time or catch up. Now, if you think of a physical event, and we have several strategic and monitor farms in Scotland, which are really important. But if you look at a physical event, you're lucky to get 200 people. So I think there's an enormous lesson out there about how we can use modern technology and move that forward. So yeah, lots and lots of lessons.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. Moving on, and it's probably taken us 45 minutes to get to this point, but the elephant in the Zoom is always milk price. I don't think you can ever talk to farmers without talking about milk price. And it's a question that's actually come in from a farmer, and it's actually an interesting way of putting it. you know, a number of consultants out there and a number of public bodies are all saying that the cost of production of milk is around the late 20s, 30 pence mark. How then can farmers get paid what they're getting, and we're being asked to do it at such a low price? Chris, what's your thoughts on that?
It's got to
where's the long term in this?
It's got to come from consumers. Liquid milk is far too cheap. It's a fantastic product, and the service levels in liquid milk are probably second maybe to newspapers. I'm not quite sure. I bet they're on an even keel. So basically, within 24 or 48 hours, milk comes from a cow, from a farm in the middle of nowhere, gets processed and delivered to every postcode in the land who wants to stock milk, and they want to pay sod all for it. It's got to come from consumers. That has to change. Can't see any other way forward. And I think there needs to be more ethics in the supply chain. I mean, people who know my thoughts know that I view Tesco and Sainsbury's as rewarding their own farmers while pickpocketing the directs, stroke non-directs. I think that's got to stop. They need to be exposed, because the price for the Muller directs is lower than it would normally be, I think, because of the Tesco and Sainsbury's pools. So more money from consumers, more ethics in the supply chain.
Robert, that sounds simplistic and easy, and how difficult is that?
Yeah, well, it is a challenge, but if we look at liquid and its returns, and now in a situation where there are capacity constraints, but if the players left, if we're only a small player, if the players left in that industry cannot get bigger returns out of the market, when there are capacity constraints on liquid milk, and there's capacity constraints right now, then it starts off with their own fault. I mean, we're obviously part of that, or a small part of that to some degree, you know, but there's only 2 big players left. They can't get better returns out of the market when it's capacity constrained, then it's their own fault. But
you can't do it now, they'll never do it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, Chris. So we need to get more returns, and we need to get continual innovation on added value products. Added value sounds, you know, a bit of a funny word, but we need more innovation on that, on products here, and totally agree with some of what Nicholas was saying about finding returns for milk in other areas that aren't necessarily going into supermarkets and into retail. But these would be the same 2 bits: liquid milk, increased returns, and more innovation. There is a lot to go at. Dairy is, we feel, really strongly aligned to consumer trends around provenance, health, authenticity, protein, fats being seen as good. So we should be optimistic. It's just go on with it.
Can I just come in there as a bit of a follow-up comment, Robert? So one of the questions that came in advance of the session was about rewarding level supply, and I suppose it links into your point about processing capacity. You know, how do we seasonal payments have obviously reduced over time, or disappeared out of the payment structure for a lot of processors. I suppose, how do we reward the level supply, which is not only what the consumer wants, but also has cost implications on farm and limits in terms of processing capacity?
Yeah, no, so certainly the balancing cost for all dairies will be a bigger number when we actually think it might be, if we just sit down and calculate it. I'm sure some of the bigger companies have calculated it and we're surprised by it. So, and we pay a flat price, and we have some producers on seasonal pricing. That number has actually gone up over the last 2 or 3 years as more people have slightly gone off a flat profile. But broadly, 90% of our farmers will be on a flat price with no seasonal adjustments. So, yeah, it's part of the mix, and just part of what we were saying earlier. We need to get more returns from the market.
I just wondered, Nick, have you any thoughts on that, in terms of, you know, there's obviously a focus from an AHDB perspective on looking at the, you encouraging farmers to pick a system and be good at it, and some of that inevitably comes with the block calving system, which can be a challenge in itself. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, both Chris and Robert have answered it pretty fully in terms of markets in the UK. I would just say on new product development, we are very poor. We are very poor, and we're all short shelf life product as well. And Chris's point about cheese and the opportunity in cheese is very real. If I look at America, enormous growth in protein dairy drinks, which is a fantastic growth market opportunity, and that's long life product. But I would make another slightly wider point. It comes back to this fundamental malaise within the dairy industry, that we still hanker after the high returns out of liquid milk at a flat profile. We still think it ought to be the highest price return because it is flat profile, etc. And unless we get off that hook, unless we start looking at other areas, we've got a bigger problem coming at us. It's not just the flat profile cost at the moment. Look at climate change coming. Look at the issues around sustainability. Look at the point about imported feed. We actually have a fantastic opportunity if we can get our forage growth right, if we can actually produce not necessarily enormous yields of milk per cow, but really competitive costs out of forage production. But that means we've got to have markets and processing that matches that as well. So I think it's an integral process of looking strategically at everything we're doing and saying, where do we go as an industry, rather than just carry on nadgering away at trying to hanker after what used to be good.
I'm conscious of time. We only have a few minutes remaining. I maybe want to ask you, Chris, can I give you sort of 60 seconds to look into your crystal ball and tell everybody on the call who's listening today what the future of dairy looks like in the next 5-10 years?
I would be hugely optimistic about dairy. I think, if you take a look at what's happening now, you've got Arla that's absolutely flying with its brands. We can discuss Lurpak until the cows come home, but they're flying with their brands. Robert's business is flying in Scotland. COVID has shown us that consumers love dairy. They're buying more dairy, they're buying more brands, they love it. We've got a great story. We need to tell it better. Nick, your organisation needs to tell it better, and I think the unions are doing a better job than they did on telling the story. I don't know what seems to have happened in lockdown, but they seem to be really busy getting out stories about farming and what it's all about. So we've got a great story. We've got progress on cheese, which hopefully the politicians won't screw up. We've got tighter capacity on liquid, which Robert mentioned, which gives us the best chance of tightening up that sector for a decade. What else would I say? I think the working together through the supply chain on COVID means we've got a much better chance of getting a good outcome on contracts than we had, say, a year ago. And I think on the environment, I think actually one day people will wake up to the fact that farming and cows are not bad for the environment compared to everything else, and they're actually part of the solution. Because if you take butter, if you take cheese, if you take a lot of the other products on a nutrient basis, on a nutrient dense basis, I don't think there's much to rival dairy product. So if you take all of that, I mean, what's not to love?
You see, Chris, you take a mile. You've definitely had more than 60 seconds there.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry, boss.
Stuart, quickly, do you want to say a few words before we close the session?
I'll let you come to a conclusion at the end, Becki. But just a quick thing to everybody watching. I hold in my hand a piece of paper, a famous quote, is all the questions we've had in, and we've had more questions, and time is just really difficult here. I'll make a commitment. I will put these questions to the panelists, and I will feed back to you. And I apologise, it's just time is an issue here. But thank you. But anyway, back to you, Becki.
Great, Stuart. Thanks very much. I suppose all that remains for me to do then is to thank the speakers on the panel for their time today, generously given, to thank everybody who's listening for their active participation, both before the session. Stuart's inbox has been pretty hot, and also during the session. The questions have been brilliant. Thank you very much. To thank Stuart and the Scottish Dairy Hub and for assisting and for joining me in this event, and to genuinely, sincerely tell you from the bottom of my heart that I really, really, really do hope and look forward to seeing you in person next year at AgriScot. Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.